If we are honest with ourselves, the question no one wants to face is the one that we have to consider. If the Kremlin were ever to choose to widen its violence beyond Ukraine, how long could Britain actually fight? Not in a speech or a stirring documentary, but in reality against a nuclear-armed power with a vast army and an economy geared now for war. There is a comforting assumption that NATO would always be united, that the United States would provide overwhelming support, and that British forces would be one sharp spear in a much larger shield. In truth, that is still the most likely scenario. A pure Anglo-Russian conflict is highly improbable, but probability is not certainty, and part of a strategy is imagining the scenario we hope never to meet. So let's begin with the blunt arithmetic. Since 2022, Russia has rebuilt its military industry at a dizzying pace. Each month it produces hundreds of tanks and fighting vehicles, swarms of Lancet drones and substantial artillery. It's also absorbing enormous casualties, but still replacing its losses. Its wartime economy is estimated at close to 7% of GDP. It's brutal, crude, sometimes chaotic, but there is sheer volume. Britain, by contrast, has spent decades assuming that high technology could replace military mass. The result is a force that is excellent but tiny. On paper, we have roughly 74,000 soldiers. Take away those who are medically unfit, assigned overseas in non-fighting roles or otherwise unavailable, and the current deployable army falls closer to 50,000. Russia has more amputees from the Ukraine war than we have soldiers. The Royal Navy, though equipped with formidable submarines and 2 major carriers, has only around 60 ships in total and struggles to crew the fleet it possesses. The RAF is a fraction of the size it once was. At the end of the Cold War, Britain spent more than 4% of its GDP on defence. Today, we are trying to reach 2.4% by 2027. Meanwhile, Russian doctrine is clear. They plan for wars of attrition. We plan for wars that end before the ammunition runs out. A modern conflict would not begin with tanks rolling through Kent. It would begin silently, phones without signal, ATMs failing, food distribution thrown into confusion, undersea cables cut, satellites blinded, drones over airports. In other words, hybrid attacks designed to induce panic before the first missile even hits anything at all. Russia already probes our systems. They do this because they believe they are already engaged in a struggle with us. Some argue that Britain is therefore already at war. There have been assassinations with radioactive materials on our soil, an act of war, and attempted murders using nerve agents. There have been cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns. These are hostile acts. They're not random. They're not friendly mistakes. They are the edges of a strategy that seeks to paralyze a society before anyone realizes the danger. Yet the key question is not whether Russia is hostile. That is settled. The question is resilience. Could we withstand sustained assault? That means in anything from spare parts to heavy armour, from medical support to trained reserves. Here the answers become uncomfortable. Analysts at the Royal United Services Institute have warned that Britain has almost no capacity to absorb battlefield casualties and rebuild combat units at speed. Ammunition levels would be exhausted in days. Drone supplies would last less than 24 hours if used at pace. If used in the sort of way that Ukraine employs them, and a serious land campaign would degrade our army within weeks. These are not partisan criticisms. They are shared by former defence secretaries at different parties. The brutal truth is that British governments have underwritten national security on the assumption that major war in Europe was finished in 1991. We believed in a peace dividend. Putin believes in the opposite. What should we do then? The temptation is to announce new spending, quote large numbers, assume that because a minister has a new strategy, everything is solved. In reality, rebuilding war-fighting depth takes years. Factories must expand, stockpiles must be filled, people must be recruited, trained and retrained. And they must be retained. Society must understand why this matters. There must be a morale boost, and that last point may be the most important. The British public doesn't feel that war is something that could touch them. Poles, Finns, Estonians, they understand the shadow of the Kremlin. We have not lived with that fear for generations. However, this is not a counsel of despair. Britain retains enormous advantages. Our intelligence services are among the most respected in the world. Our cyber capabilities are sharp and creative. Our nuclear deterrent remains credible. Our special forces are elite, and most importantly, we possess a profound strategic reputation. Allies trust us, adversaries know we are serious when we act. So how long could Britain fight alone? The short answer is not long, weeks, not months, in a sustained land conflict. But the more responsible conclusion is that freedom and security in Europe do not depend on Britain standing alone. They depend on alliances that are functioning, credible, and backed by real capability. That requires investment now, not when danger has already arrived. If Putin ever believed that NATO would fracture, that the United States might hesitate, or that Britain would not risk blood or treasure, then deterrence fails. We must make the cost of aggression obvious before the first move is made. I'm not a pugilist. I'm not a great believer that war is the answer to anything. I believe talking is the answer to everything. But I also believe that we have to be ready. There is a line that should echo in our minds. Defence is expensive, war is vastly more so. The costs are measured not only in budgets, but in lives, in liberty, in the power to choose how we live. It's tempting to hide from those truths. But strategy is not built on hope, it is built on preparation. Britain can endure, Britain has endured, but to ensure that endurance in the future, we must accept that the holiday from history is over. The rights we take for granted are not self-sustaining, they require strength, and strength, frankly, is a choice, and a choice that we need to be making.